guess how many nuclear weapons are there in the world? I think a lot of nations wouldn't know, but I know somebody who knows and working so hard representing humanity to make not a single one to be still existing in the world. The Cold War has gone, the nuclear weapons are still here. And after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, very close to Malaysia, this issue, we never want to see anyone being the victim or being nuked again. So I'm glad here at the World Economic Forum, this is a special recorded session of again AWANI at the World Economic Forum Davos. I will sit beside great people, and my new next friend is the great person called Beatrice Fihn. She's the executive director of, I call it ICAN. It's an international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, so that's the short form. But the big issue is, why would any one of those countries and nuclear weapon makers want to even consider doing away with the arsenal? Because the whole point of having them is why they are where they are right now.
Well, I wouldn't really agree with that framing. I think that the majority of states in the world don't have nuclear weapons and do not want weapons of mass destruction that indiscriminately slaughter civilians. That would be a war crime to use them. But some states, the 9, still cling on to this outdated 1940s weapon. But we live in a modern world now, right now, and we have different types of conflict. It's no longer the Cold War.
Yes.
We don't have a bipolar system, we have a multipolar system. Mm-hmm. We have regional conflicts that are influencing global politics. Mm-hmm. We have different types of threats, organized crime, terrorism, climate change, cybersecurity. None of these can be fought with nuclear weapons. So I think that right now we're seeing also a very kind of a regression from the nuclear armed states. They, much more nationalistic, authoritarian kind of policies, and with that also comes threats to use nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. So the risk is increasing. And we know, statistically speaking, that if we keep nuclear weapons forever, they will be used.
One day.
Yeah, we're counting down to that day unless we do something.
Mm-hmm. This is the World Economic Forum session in 2018 where leaders from the key opening plenary, Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi said it, nations are becoming more self-centered. And then the first press conference had Madame Christine Lagarde, when she said that the outlook economy looks strengthening for 2018 and 2019, but there are a lot of cautions. One of it is the geopolitical risk, and that means countries fighting countries, and some of these countries have nuclear weapons. So how do you even start to move to achieve the targets that you have set?
Well, I think I'm here to talk to world leaders and business leaders that we can no longer ignore this issue. Just like climate change, if we ignore it, we're all going to pay the price. It's not an issue that we can just leave to the 9 world leaders in those states. But we also have to start thinking about nuclear weapons as weapons and not as magic power tools. Mm-hmm. But these are bombs, big giant radiation sort of spreading dirty bombs that will create chaos and catastrophic humanitarian consequences. And it will spread across borders. Nobody wants to actually use nuclear weapons, but the risk is there, so we have to act now. And we have a way forward. In this moment where we also have a very negative trend with nuclear armed states going in the wrong direction, the majority of states in the world is moving in a positive direction, trying to create a pathway out of this. And that is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which Malaysia was a part of, one of the leaders on developing. And this is a really significant tool.
Winning recognition is good. You've won recognition for ICAN at the highest level for the Nobel Peace Prize. But how do you gain more momentum now? Because it's no point reducing it by 5%, 10%, when the stockpile that's still there is enough to destroy Earth many times over. So how do you increase and quantum leap this fight?
People. We have to mobilize people, because at the end of the day, politicians are not going to drive change themselves. They are not the activists, for example, that have a vision and going to achieve it. It comes from people, and people are going to pressure them into acting. And I think that every country really has a role to play. This is not just for the 9 states, and I think that the ASEAN region, for example, has been showing like really great leadership. Countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand have really taken this as their issue as well. They have a say in this. So I think that each country that signs and ratifies this treaty is going to contribute to reducing the risk.
People talk a lot about technology. Would technology also provide the answer to do away with nuclear weapons?
I think technology, in particular military technology, shows that military needs and kind of today's modern armed conflicts are going in a completely different direction than nuclear weapons. We are no longer talking about leveling an entire city and slaughtering civilians. We have precision guidance weapons, drones and that kind of stuff. So I think that definitely technology is, and cybersecurity and cyber warfare is going to grow in importance. So I think that nuclear weapons are just not equipped to deal with today's threats. And we need to rethink, what is actually constitutes a modern, effective defense.
Cybersecurity risk has been identified as one of the top threat from now moving forward, but usually more for banking, finance, some cases espionage. But imagine if that filters through to the stockpile of nuclear weapons.
Absolutely. I mean, look at Hawaii, for example. You had this false missile alert. It was terrifying, of course. What if that alert had gone to the command center or to Donald Trump himself? What would the reaction have been? Would they have been, oh, let's wait and see if it actually is a missile, or let's fire immediately? So I think that there can be many accidents, miscalculations, or intentional sabotage through cyber attacks. And that's extremely dangerous.
Let's go for the first break, but once we are back, how many nuclear warheads are out there? When I Google, I can only get until 2015, and it's like thousands and thousands. But it's only a few countries as compared to the 192 members of the United Nations.
9 countries with nuclear weapons, 15,000 warheads around.
Correct. So let's take 9 and 15 against 190 other countries, and the fact that more and more people wanting to travel, be friends, visit one another. How do we use the power of the people to make sure once and for all that the next generation do not have to deal with this issue at all? This is the legacy of war that we do not want to pass down to the next generation. Let's ask Beatrice right after this short break. I've interviewed many people at the World Economic Forum, and usually the best inspiration doesn't only come from the top elite leaders. From this movement called Global Shapers of the World Economic Forum, people from Ghana right up to Papua New Guinea of Indonesia, all the unlikely heroes in the modern world. Everywhere around the world, individuals are rising up, forming coalitions, forming communities. But this is not as simple as recycling. When you talk about nuclear weapons, you're dealing with 9 super heavyweights of the world. So I want to start with people power. I'm sure you started somewhere. And how do you move what you do right now? What kind of inspiration has taken you to this level? Maybe we need to infect 9 billion people on Earth with the same.
I think one of the biggest inspiration is all the people that work on this issue as ICAN, the hundreds, maybe thousands of really energetic, motivated, super smart, ambitious people who just want to do something better. And I think it's just, I look at the world, and obviously it looks like a very negative place right now, with lots of threats increasing and concerns, but we also have achieved so much. If you think about the freedoms and the rights that we have today, it was a lot worse 50 years ago, 100 years ago. If you got to choose which part of time you wanted to live and have the most possibilities, you would probably say today. And those things have come from people mobilizing. Ending slavery, women's right to vote, civil rights, ending apartheid, all of these kind of big fights for justice have come through people. It doesn't come from the top. Those in power never want to create equality, really. I mean, maybe,
they won't let go of power.
They don't like to let go of power, of course. So they have to be forced. And it's the same thing with nuclear weapons. The 9 states, they don't want to let go of that ultimate power. So we have to force them, and we have to mobilize everyone around. And I think that's the way out of this kind of current situation we have, is to mobilize people, and not just in the nuclear armed states, but everywhere around, because we have allowed them. It's a bit like democracy, you know. As soon as the people rise up, they're chanceless. If the rest of the world mobilize, they are not going to be able to keep them.
The best weapon for the masses is the ballot boxes. Except for countries where there's no chance to vote for the leader. I think out of the 9, the majority have a voting system in place. So I can look at connecting the movement right to the ballot box.
Absolutely, and we're really encouraging people to speak to their leaders, and if the leaders don't listen, elect new ones. Make this a political issue. Make this something that parliamentarians around the world suddenly have to deal with, because at the end of the day, your representatives are the ones who are supposed to protect us. How are they supposed to protect us from nuclear war? They can't. So we have to get rid of these weapons. And we have to demand from our political leader that they act on this. And I think that's really something we all need to do. It needs to be an issue that politicians have to deal with and not just ignore.
ICAN has been around for just over a decade. What kind of examples can you give that is clearly moving towards that direction?
Well, for example, we work very closely with governments, and in a government like Malaysia, for example, who has a traditional position or very much in favor of nuclear disarmament, have been very active. They were part of negotiating the treaty. They have signed the treaty, but now it has to be ratified in the parliament. So now we need, for example, organizations and people in Malaysia to approach the politicians and say, this is a priority, you have to ratify this treaty now.
You've been quoted here saying that, you know, making away, doing away with nuclear weapon is as important as climate change. And when people talk about climate change, it took some time, you know, too slow for many of us to really comprehend. And now somebody's saying that climate change is not real, but here in Davos, I've been to the Arctic base camp. There's real evidence presented by years of study and empirical evidence. Then it's slowly now sinking in. Would nuclear weapon need to go that way? Because I think the biggest testimony was World War II. But however, the ecosystem where this is in context, I think, should be helping, because with social media, with the rise of people communicating, the decision making in the hands of the elite is slowly being eroded.
I think it's a good, you know, to draw the parallels with climate change, because also climate change is difficult to see on a daily basis. Just like nuclear weapons, we don't see them. And the pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are very grey and black and white, old times. It's like a historical thing. It's irrelevant to us. So we have to show that they are still around, and that's a communication challenge for us, for example. But I think today, with the threats between the US and North Korea, it's quite evident. The incident in Hawaii, it suddenly becomes real to people. So I think people are starting to wake up to this issue. And we have a bunch of facts on the risk, on the consequences of use, on how many nuclear weapons there are, on the plans and preparations for using them. And we need to bring that to the public attention, and then we need to pressure our leaders to answer these questions. Are you really going to slaughter a whole city? Does that make any sense today?
Communication you mentioned, is that a big part of your movement?
Absolutely. I think most people are against nuclear weapons. Very few people think that it's a great weapon. But people don't really think about it as real. I think also people think that if there's nuclear war, we all die, so there's no point of thinking about it. Okay. It's like an asteroid will hit Earth. A little bit also like climate change. It's kind of like it's so far away that, well, you know, that would suck. But so I think that we need to also show what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There were survivors. Yes. There will be survivors. And someone is going to have to try to give water to the survivors, put bandages on the burn damages, and trying to help people dispose of the bodies. I mean, all these practical questions. So I think that it's important to try to communicate the realities of this, and that it's still a risk, and that they will be used, and we're going to have to deal with this unless we do something.
You know, in many battles and wars, there will be acceptable damages. And there'll be ways or contingency plan to deal with that. But in the nuclear war, there's no such thing. Nobody can prepare for any aftermath. No.
And we've had organizations like the ICRC or the UN's humanitarian agencies. They've studied and done research and reports that conclude that they cannot provide any adequate help. As emergency relief organizations, those that are supposed to respond
don't know what to do.
They don't know what to do, and they would just pull out.
Okay.
Because the radiation will poison everything.
Correct. Let's go for the last break. Once we are back, this interview is also about finding out the character of the person, and you have received the highest peace award for the Nobel Prize. So let's go back to your early childhood, your early days. You could have been anything you want. You know, you so-called could have been supermodel for all I know. But you chose this vocation. Maybe it's linked back to how you were brought up early on. So all this thing and about giving back to society, let's talk about that after the short break. When you grow up, what do you want to be? I know the old conservative parents would say, you know, doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineers. Have you ever thought that you would be leading a movement that will find a way, it seems difficult and tough, to convince the biggest powers of the world to actually eradicate all nuclear weapons? If you haven't, then you must listen to my new friend. How on earth did you come across this fight and decided that I want to lead this fight?
You know, it was kind of an accident.
Serendipitous moment?
Well, I mean, I grew up in an area in Sweden that was a lot of immigrants from all over the world. And my schoolmates, they either came from war and conflict or had parents who came from different types of crises or conflict. They had fled the regime in Chile, the revolution in Iran, for example, the war in the Balkans, the starvation in Somalia during the 90s. So all of these kind of big events that happen around the world, somehow, even when I was 6, 7 years old, I didn't really understand them, but it affected me in a way, and really sort of also show how things that happen on the other side of the world still affect us. Yes. And it's all connected, and also people are quite the same all over the world. They want the same. Yeah. You know, a safe home, security for their kids, food, you know, a happy life. Correct. We're not that different. Yes. So I think that there's always been there, this interest in the world and in kind of international relations. But as many people, I'm born in the 80s and grew up after the Cold War in a way. I never thought about nuclear weapons. It wasn't really a part of my thinking. I wanted to work on human rights and maybe the environment. Gender equality was very big for me. But I worked with an organization, got involved in a big peace organization in Sweden, and they did lots of different things, but also nuclear weapons. And when I got confronted with this issue, first I was like, nuclear weapons? It's so old-fashioned, nobody cares. Do they still exist? But then it's just the hypocrisy around nuclear weapons and the bizarreness of this. People want it, but not to use it. It's the only weapon that exists to prevent itself.
Correct.
I mean, it's
Yes.
just, it's a,
Yes.
we got it all
Yes.
wrong when
Yes.
it comes to nuclear weapons. And I think that as opposed to climate change, it's really also demanding kind of a fundamental change in our lifestyle. Nuclear weapons, it could be quite easy to get rid of them. It's only 9 states that have them.
Yes.
They're not that useful. They have enough conventional weapon to sort of protect themselves. It could be quite an easy fix, and it would make the world quite a lot safer. So I think it's both like really horrible and depressing, and then also quite fixable.
Yeah.
So it was just an interesting combination, and then I got stuck in a way.
You would have to meet powerful leaders of powerful nations to really get progress on this. And at the World Economic Forum, this is the platform. Many leaders are here, from Angela Merkel, Germany, you see Canadian, Trudeau, Macron of France. And during our discussion now, I'm sure he's making his way to the mountaintop already, the President of the United States of America. So you're trying to meet him. If you meet him, what are you going to do?
Well, I'm going to tell him that, and other leaders, that this is a really urgent threat, and they will be used if you don't do anything. If you continue like this, they will be used, and the consequences will be horrible.
What if he replies to you that this is America first, other people destroy theirs first, then we will destroy ours?
But it's going to impact America as well. And the thing is, what we forget about is that the US tested nuclear weapons on their own people.
Okay.
In Nevada, for example. And there's still a lot of problems, environmental problems, health problems. The radiation has poisoned a whole generation there. Women are giving birth to stillborn babies or different diseases. Whose security are we talking about? Because nuclear weapons have not created security for these people. It has destroyed their lives.
So you would have a team to go and assess this kind of situation also?
Yeah, we're looking a lot at nuclear weapons testing as well, in the Pacific, in Australia.
How bad is it in the Pacific?
It's really bad. It has completely uprooted their lifestyle and their environment.
And we're not talking about some desolate, faraway atolls or small islands, right?
Well, in some ways, it's Australia, for example. In some very small Pacific Island states, but also in the United States, in Kazakhstan, for example, in China, in Algeria. And what is noticeable is that this has quite a lot to do with racism and colonialism.
Okay.
They didn't really test on white people.
Yes.
They tested on their colonies or on people that they thought were, indigenous people.
So we're talking about fourth industrial revolution, but on this matter, the colonial era, not even the 20th century, the 19th and the 17th and the 16th and 15th, the thinking is still the same.
Absolutely. It's like a privileged group of countries that, dominates the rest of the world with these weapons. And it's up to the rest of the world to stand up against that.
Okay. I have a few minutes left, so I'm going to let you weave your input on this because you're one of them. There are, for the first time, 7 co-chairs. When you're one of the empowered female leader right here in Davos, what do you think of this new, they used to call it Davos men, but now we have Davos ladies. Do you think this will help the empowerment of women in the fight to ban nuclear weapons forever?
Absolutely. I think that any proposed solution is better if we have a diverse group of people working on the solutions. It will be more reflective of the actual needs. If you only have men, they will only see half of the solutions in a way, or problems, or they might not think of the consequences in the same way. So I think it's very important with diversity, both from where you are in different parts of the world, and from different background, but also different gender.
From the 9 countries, is it easier if they have female leaders?
I don't think it's that women are more peaceful or better at this, but I think that women often brings another perspective that can help.
Okay.
But it requires more than one woman at the top. It has to be all the way
An
from the
ecosystem,
military to politics to business, everywhere, in order for this perspective to really grab hold.
Never enough time with great people. Can we end with your take on the importance of fighting a cause and giving back to where you come from?
It's really important to try to improve the world, our own local communities, everything from the international to the local. I like to think, of course, you mentioned people who want their kids to be doctors and lawyers, and they can also contribute. Not everyone has to devote their entire life to world peace or nuclear disarmament. Everyone can do a little bit. And if we all just do a little bit, you know, spend an hour a month on some kind of volunteer work or contribute with a little bit of money to an NGO to do the work, the world would be so much better, because people's power is the only thing that really drives these things.
Spoken like a true Nobel Peace winner. Thank you so much, Beatrice,
Thank
for
you
making
so much.
time to be on this show again. Now, that has been my newfound friend, the leader, the female leader of the initiative to make sure that there's no more danger and threats of nuclear weapons by doing away with them. A tough sell to the powers that be, but together we can make it happen. Thank you so much. This has been a special recording of Agenda AWANI at the World Economic Forum 2018 in Davos.